Tonight's dinner doesn't have to feel disappointing just because you're trying to save money. In fact, some of the most comforting meals are made from the simplest ingredients sitting quietly in the pantry. Eggs, beans, potatoes, rice, cabbage, and cornmeal may not sound exciting, but with a little creativity, they can become warm and satisfying meals that cost less than a couple of dollars. These aren't tiny portions or meals that leave you searching the refrigerator an hour later. These are honest dinners, the kind that feel familiar, easy to prepare, and especially helpful on days when energy is low and standing in the kitchen for too long simply isn't appealing. And the first recipe on today's list proves that inexpensive food can still feel nourishing, comforting, and surprisingly satisfying. Number 1. Creamy cornmeal supper bowl with white beans and greens. There was a time when people knew how to stretch simple ingredients into meals that fed both the body and the spirit. This first dinner brings back some of that old-fashioned wisdom. Most people think cornmeal belongs only in cornbread, but it can become something entirely different. When cooked slowly, it transforms into a soft and creamy bowl that's somewhere between grits and a rustic country porridge. It's warm, gentle, and perfect for evenings when you want something easy to enjoy. Begin with 1/3 cup of plain yellow cornmeal and 1 cup of water. Bring the water to a gentle simmer and slowly sprinkle in the cornmeal while stirring. Taking your time helps prevent lumps and creates a smoother texture. As the mixture thickens, add a small splash of milk if you have some available. Even a couple tablespoons add extra richness. If milk isn't available, plain water works just fine. Season the bowl with black pepper, onion powder, garlic powder, and just a pinch of salt. For a little extra comfort, stir in a teaspoon of butter or a few drops of olive oil. It's amazing how such a small amount can make the whole dish feel more satisfying. Now comes the part that turns this from a side dish into a complete supper. Add half a cup of white beans. Navy beans, cannellini beans, or even pinto beans work beautifully. They bring protein, fiber, and enough substance to make this bowl truly filling. Next, stir in half a cup of frozen spinach or any chopped greens you have on hand. Kale, collards, turnip greens, or even mixed vegetables can work just as well. Frozen vegetables have a wonderful advantage. They're already washed, chopped, and ready whenever you need them. Allow everything to warm together for another minute or two, and suddenly you've created something much greater than the sum of its parts. The creamy cornmeal provides lasting energy. The beans add protein and fiber. The greens contribute vitamins and color. But perhaps most importantly, the texture is gentle and comforting. It doesn't require much chewing, making it especially appealing for older adults or anyone who simply wants a soft, soothing meal. And the beauty of this supper bowl is that it adapts to whatever you already have. No white beans. Use black beans. No greens. Add peas or corn. Want more flavor? A spoonful of salsa, a sprinkle of cheese, or even a soft egg on top can completely change the character of the dish. Meals like this remind us that simple food isn't something to be embarrassed about. In many ways, it's wisdom passed down through generations. People long before us understood that a few humble ingredients could create something nourishing and comforting. And that's exactly what this bowl delivers. Warmth, simplicity, and the feeling that you've taken care of yourself without spending a fortune. But if you think this first meal was clever, wait until you see what's coming next. Because the next recipe takes one leftover ingredient most people overlook and transforms it into a cozy dinner that tastes like something Grandma might have made on a cold evening. And it all starts with a simple bowl of rice. Sometimes the pantry looks nearly empty, and that's when many people assume dinner is going to be disappointing. But some of the most comforting meals come from ingredients that have quietly been sitting on the shelf all along. This next recipe proves exactly that. With nothing more than a bowl of rice, a little tomato sauce, and a single egg, you can create something that feels warm, satisfying, and far more comforting than its price tag suggests. 2. Cozy tomato rice bowl with tender egg strands. There is something wonderfully reassuring about meals that don't require complicated ingredients or expensive cuts of meat. This dish has that old-fashioned spirit, Simple foods transformed into something that feels complete. If you have leftover rice in the refrigerator, you're already halfway there. In fact, day-old rice works beautifully because it absorbs flavors even better. Start with 1 cup of cooked rice. White rice, brown rice, or even instant rice can work. The goal isn't perfection. It's creating a meal that feels comforting and filling. Now, let's make the sauce that brings everything together. In a small saucepan, add about half a cup of tomato sauce, crushed tomatoes, or diced tomatoes. If tomato paste is all you have, simply mix a tablespoon with water to create a quick sauce. Pour in a few extra tablespoons of water or broth to loosen the mixture and season it with black pepper, garlic powder, onion powder, and a pinch of dried oregano or Italian seasoning. One small twist makes a surprising difference. If the tomatoes taste too sharp, add a tiny pinch of sugar or a drop of honey. Not enough to make the sauce sweet, just enough to soften the acidity and create a smoother flavor. Allow the mixture to simmer gently for several minutes until it becomes rich and slightly thickened. And now comes the ingredient that transforms this from plain rice with sauce into a comforting supper. Beat 1 egg in a cup. Slowly drizzle it into the simmering tomato mixture while gently stirring. Instead of scrambling, the egg forms delicate ribbons throughout the sauce. They become soft, tender strands that add protein and make the entire dish feel heartier. Take your time here. You want silky ribbons, not chunks. Once the egg has cooked, spoon the warm tomato mixture generously over the rice. Suddenly, what began as a few humble ingredients becomes something that feels like a proper meal. The rice provides steady energy. The tomatoes add brightness and flavor. And the egg contributes protein and richness without adding much cost. But perhaps the best part is the texture. Everything is soft, warm, and easy to enjoy. There are no tough pieces to chew and no heavy dishes to wash afterward. 1 pan, 1 bowl, and 1 spoon are all you really need. This recipe is also wonderfully flexible. No rice. Try serving the tomato mixture over noodles, mashed potatoes, toast, or even a baked potato. No egg. White beans or lentils can provide a similar boost. Want extra comfort? Sprinkle a little shredded cheese over the top and let it melt into the warm sauce. And if you happen to have leftover chicken or vegetables, they can easily find a home here too. That's the beauty of practical cooking. It's not about following rules. It's about making something nourishing from what you already have. Meals like this remind us that comfort doesn't always come from expensive ingredients. Sometimes it comes from familiar flavors, warm bowls, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing you've cared for yourself without spending much money. And believe it or not, the next meal on this list might sound unusual at first. In fact, some people raise their eyebrows the first time they hear about it. But one common pantry ingredient turns ordinary noodles into a creamy, satisfying supper that people around the world have been enjoying for generations. And once you try it, plain noodles may never taste the same again. By now, you've probably noticed something interesting about these meals. None of them depend on expensive ingredients or complicated recipes. Instead, they rely on something people have done for generations, making the most of what they already have. And this next dinner may surprise you. At first, some people hesitate when they hear one of the ingredients. But after the first bite, many discover that this simple pantry staple turns ordinary noodles into a rich and satisfying supper that tastes far more special than its cost would suggest. 3. Creamy Peanut Butter Noodle Supper Bowl. Sometimes the best recipes are the ones nobody talks about anymore. Most people know noodles are inexpensive, but plain noodles by themselves can feel unfinished. And while packaged seasoning packets are convenient, they can often be too salty or leave the meal feeling one-dimensional. That's where this simple trick comes in. The secret ingredient is something many households already have sitting in the cupboard: peanut butter. Now, before you dismiss the idea, remember that savory peanut sauces have been enjoyed around the world for centuries. This version simply brings that same comforting idea into an easy, budget-friendly meal that anyone can prepare. Start with a small handful of spaghetti, thin noodles, or even a package of ramen noodles without using the seasoning packet. Cook them until tender. In fact, If softer foods are easier for you to enjoy, don't be afraid to cook them a little longer than the package suggests. Dinner isn't a competition. Comfort comes first. While the noodles cook, prepare the sauce directly in your serving bowl. Add 1 tablespoon of peanut butter, a teaspoon of soy sauce or a pinch of salt, a splash of lemon juice or vinegar, and a little garlic powder. Then stir in 2 or 3 tablespoons of hot noodle water. At first, the mixture may seem too thick, but something wonderful happens. As the warm water blends with the peanut butter, the sauce transforms into something smooth and creamy. If necessary, add another spoonful of water until it reaches the consistency you like. For an extra touch of flavor, a few drops of honey or a pinch of red pepper flakes can give the sauce a whole new personality without changing its comforting nature. Now, during the final minutes of cooking, toss some frozen vegetables into the noodle pot. Peas, carrots, broccoli, or mixed vegetables all work beautifully. Since they're already cleaned and chopped, they make life easier and help turn this simple dish into a complete meal. Drain the noodles, saving a little cooking water just in case the sauce needs thinning. Then toss everything together. Suddenly, what started as ordinary noodles becomes something rich, creamy, and deeply satisfying. The noodles provide energy. The vegetables add color and fiber. And the peanut butter contributes healthy fats and enough protein to help keep you feeling satisfied longer. One small change makes this version even more versatile. If you'd like additional protein, a sliced boiled egg, a spoonful of chickpeas, or even a few pieces of leftover chicken can easily be added. But even without extras, this bowl has remarkable staying power. And perhaps that's what makes this meal so appealing. It doesn't pretend to be fancy. It simply takes humble ingredients and turns them into something comforting. The kind of meal you make after a long day when you don't want to spend an hour standing in the kitchen. The kind of meal that reminds you that simple doesn't mean boring. Because sometimes, the smartest recipes are the ones that quietly prove that good food doesn't have to be expensive. And speaking of surprising dinners, the next recipe may challenge another common belief. Most people think oats belong strictly at breakfast. But the next meal transforms this inexpensive pantry staple into a warm, savory supper with a rich mushroom flavor that feels almost like a creamy risotto. And many people who try it wonder why they waited so long to put oatmeal on the dinner table. By now, one thing has probably become clear. Comfort food doesn't always come from expensive ingredients or recipes that take hours to prepare. Sometimes, the foods we've overlooked for years are the ones capable of bringing the most warmth to the dinner table. And this next meal might surprise you more than any recipe we've talked about so far. Because most people see oats and immediately think of breakfast. But long before fancy grain bowls and restaurant risottos became popular, simple home cooks knew that oats could do much more. With the right seasonings, they become rich, savory, and deeply comforting. Perfect for a quiet evening when you want something warm without spending much money. 4. Savory oatmeal bowl with mushroom gravy flavor. For many people, oatmeal brings back memories of chilly mornings and steaming cups of coffee. But this recipe takes those same humble oats and gives them a completely different personality. Instead of sweetness, this supper bowl focuses on rich, savory flavors. Begin with half a cup of old-fashioned oats. Quick oats work just as well if that's what you have in the pantry. Pour 1 cup of water or low-sodium broth into a small saucepan and bring it to a gentle simmer. Then stir in the oats and allow them to cook slowly until they become thick and creamy. The goal here isn't stiff oatmeal. Keep it soft and spoonable. If necessary, add an extra splash of liquid. Especially on low-energy days, a creamy texture can make dinner feel much more enjoyable. Now it's time to build the flavor. Fresh mushrooms are wonderful, but they aren't necessary. A small amount of canned mushrooms works beautifully and keeps the cost low. Since they're already soft and sliced, they require almost no effort. Add the mushrooms directly into the oats and season everything with black pepper, onion powder, garlic powder, and just a tiny splash of Worcestershire sauce if you happen to have some. One small twist can make this meal even more comforting. A pinch of dried thyme or poultry seasoning gives the bowl a flavor that feels remarkably similar to homemade gravy. Suddenly, those simple oats begin to taste far richer than you might expect. To finish, stir in a tablespoon or two of milk, plain yogurt, or even a small amount of butter. If there's a little shredded cheese hiding in the refrigerator, a sprinkle on top melts beautifully and adds extra richness without increasing the cost very much. What you end up with is something surprisingly satisfying. The oats provide soluble fiber and steady energy. The mushrooms add a savory, almost meaty flavor. And the creamy texture makes every bite easy and comforting. This is one of those meals that quietly meets you where you are. No frying, no complicated steps, no mountain of dishes waiting afterward. Just one saucepan and a warm bowl of food. And like every smart pantry meal, it welcomes substitutions. Want more protein? Stir in a soft egg while the oats are hot. Have leftover lentils or white beans? Add them in. Frozen peas or spinach can bring color and extra nutrition. Even a spoonful of cottage cheese creates additional creaminess and protein. But perhaps the greatest strength of this meal isn't found in the ingredients themselves. It's in the feeling they create. This is the kind of supper that doesn't demand endless energy. It understands tired knees, busy days, and evenings when all you really want is something warm, quiet, and comforting. And if you think oats becoming dinner is unexpected, wait until you see what's coming next. Because the next recipe takes a food many people grew up eating alongside supper and transforms it into the foundation of a creamy, hearty bowl that tastes like a cross between a classic casserole and an old-fashioned church potluck favorite. And once you see how little it costs, you may never look at leftover cornbread the same way again. One of the beautiful things about old-fashioned cooking is that very little ever went to waste. People knew how to stretch ingredients, reuse leftovers, and turn simple foods into meals that felt complete. A piece of yesterday's cornbread wasn't something to throw away. It was an opportunity to create something entirely new. And that's exactly what this next dinner is all about. Because with a little creativity, leftover cornbread and a small amount of tuna can come together to create a warm and comforting meal that feels like something straight from a country kitchen. 5. Creamy tuna and cornbread supper bowl. Many people grew up seeing cornbread served alongside beans, greens, and Sunday dinners. It wasn't just a side dish. It helped stretch meals and brought a little extra comfort to the table. This recipe gives that same idea a fresh twist. Start with one piece of leftover cornbread or a small corn muffin. In fact, slightly dry cornbread works especially well because it absorbs moisture beautifully. Break it into chunks and place it in the bottom of a bowl. Don't crumble it too finely. Leaving larger pieces creates a heartier texture that makes the meal feel more satisfying. Now it's time for the creamy topping. Open a small can of tuna packed in water. You don't need to use the entire can. Half a can is often enough for one serving, especially when you're trying to stretch ingredients wisely. Drain it well and gently flake it with a fork. In a small saucepan, combine the tuna with a quarter cup of creamed corn and a splash of milk. Season with black pepper, onion powder, and a light sprinkle of paprika for extra warmth and flavor. Here's a small variation that gives this version its own personality. Add a teaspoon of Dijon mustard or a spoonful of plain Greek yogurt. Neither ingredient is necessary, but they bring a little tanginess that makes the sauce taste richer and more homemade. Warm everything gently until the mixture becomes creamy and smooth. Then spoon the warm tuna mixture over the cornbread pieces and allow it to rest for a minute. Something wonderful happens during that short pause. The cornbread begins to soften and absorb the creamy topping, creating a texture somewhere between a casserole, stuffing, and a hearty supper bowl. Suddenly, what started as a few inexpensive ingredients feels like something much more comforting. The tuna provides protein that supports muscle health. The cornbread offers steady energy and fullness. And the creamed corn adds moisture and a touch of natural sweetness that ties everything together. This meal is especially helpful for evenings when you want something warm without spending much time cooking. There are no complicated steps, no large casserole dishes, and no leftovers that linger in the refrigerator for days. Everything is portion-friendly and easy to enjoy. Like the other meals on this list, this one is easy to adapt. Frozen peas, diced carrots, or chopped spinach can be stirred into the sauce for extra color and nutrition. A sprinkle of cheese melts beautifully on top. And if tuna isn't your favorite, canned chicken or even leftover turkey can step in just as easily. But perhaps the best part isn't found in the ingredients themselves. It's the feeling this meal creates. It carries a sense of familiarity. The kind of meal that reminds you of church suppers, family kitchens, and the quiet wisdom of people who knew how to make a little food go a long way. Because inexpensive meals don't have to feel like sacrifices. Sometimes they simply feel like home. And if you think this supper bowl is comforting, wait until you see the next recipe. Because the next meal proves that you don't need an entire casserole dish to enjoy the cozy flavor of chicken pot pie. In fact, with one slice of bread, a handful of vegetables, and a little creamy sauce, you can create a dinner that tastes like pure comfort, and it just might become the most surprising recipe on this entire list. By now, you've probably realized that some of the best comfort foods don't have to come from expensive ingredients or complicated recipes. In fact, sometimes all it takes is a few simple pantry staples and a little imagination. And this next meal proves exactly that. Because when most people think of chicken pot pie, they picture a large casserole dish, flaky crust, and plenty of time spent in the kitchen. But what if you could capture that same cozy flavor without all the effort, the mess, or the cost? Surprisingly, you can. And it starts with something as simple as a slice of bread. 6. Easy chicken pot pie toast. There is something special about meals that remind us of Sunday suppers and homemade comfort. Chicken pot pie has always been one of those dishes. But for someone cooking for one, making an entire pie can feel like more work than it's worth. That's what makes this recipe so clever. It delivers all those familiar flavors in a much simpler form. Begin with one slice of bread. Toast it lightly so it stays soft enough to enjoy comfortably. If you prefer, half of a biscuit or even a small English muffin can work just as well. Place it on a plate or in a shallow bowl and set it aside. Now for the filling. Take half a cup of frozen mixed vegetables. Peas, carrots, corn, and green beans are perfect because they come already chopped and ready to use. Warm them in a small saucepan with a few spoonfuls of water until tender. Next, add 2 or 3 tablespoons of cooked chicken, canned chicken, or leftover turkey. You don't need much. That's one of the secrets of old-fashioned cooking. The meat doesn't have to dominate the plate. Instead, it works together with the vegetables and sauce to create something satisfying. Now comes the part that makes everything taste like comfort. In a small pan, combine half a cup of milk with a teaspoon of flour. Add a tiny pat of butter, some black pepper, onion powder, and a pinch of poultry seasoning. For a little extra richness, here's a small twist. Add a spoonful of plain Greek yogurt or a teaspoon of cream cheese. It's not necessary, but it creates a smoother sauce that tastes remarkably close to homemade pot pie filling. Heat the mixture gently while stirring until it becomes creamy. Then stir in the vegetables and chicken. Soon, your kitchen starts smelling like something much more expensive than it really is. Spoon the warm mixture over the toast and allow it to rest for a minute. As the bread softens slightly underneath, it absorbs all that creamy goodness, creating a meal that's somewhere between chicken pot pie and open-faced comfort food. And that's exactly why this recipe works so well. It's soft, it's warm, and it feels familiar. The chicken supplies protein. The vegetables add fiber and color. And the creamy sauce brings everything together in a way that feels deeply satisfying. Perhaps even more important, this meal respects your energy. There's no rolling dough, no baking for an hour, no mountain of dishes waiting in the sink afterward. Just one serving, made fresh, enjoyed hot, and finished with very little cleanup. And like every smart recipe on this list, it's wonderfully flexible. No chicken, leftover turkey works beautifully. No bread. Serve the filling over mashed potatoes or rice. Want extra flavor? A sprinkle of cheese or a little parsley can brighten the entire dish. Because true comfort food isn't about perfection. It's about making ordinary ingredients feel special. And if you think this recipe captured the feeling of home, wait until you see what's coming next. Because the next dinner takes one affordable canned fish and combines it with creamy potatoes to create something that many older adults will instantly recognize from childhood. And with one simple twist, this humble recipe becomes a satisfying plate that tastes like it came straight from an old neighborhood diner. One thing that many people discover as they get older is that comfort often comes from familiarity. The meals we remember most aren't always the fancy ones. They're the simple dishes that appeared on the dinner table week after week. The meals that filled hungry stomachs, stretched the grocery budget, and somehow managed to make everyone feel cared for. And this next recipe brings back exactly that kind of feeling. Because long before seafood restaurants and expensive fish dinners became popular, families knew how to turn a small amount of canned fish into something satisfying and delicious. And with one humble ingredient already found in many kitchens, this old-fashioned favorite becomes even softer, heartier, and easier to enjoy. 7. Golden salmon and potato patties. For many older adults, salmon patties and fish cakes bring back memories of childhood. Perhaps they remind you of a family supper after church, or maybe they were one of those dependable meals your parents made when money had to stretch a little further. Whatever the memory, there's something wonderfully comforting about these simple patties. And the best part is that they don't require much fish at all. Begin with half a cup of prepared mashed potatoes. Leftover mashed potatoes work beautifully, but instant potatoes are equally practical and budget-friendly. Make them slightly thicker than usual so they'll hold their shape. Now add 2 or 3 tablespoons of canned salmon, mackerel, or even tuna. Flake the fish well with a fork so everything blends evenly. If you're using canned salmon with soft bones and you're comfortable with them, leave them in. They're rich in calcium and become almost unnoticeable once mixed into the potatoes. Season the mixture with black pepper, onion powder, and a small spoonful of mustard. Here's a little twist that gives this version a touch of freshness. Mix in a teaspoon of finely chopped parsley or a few crushed buttery crackers. The crackers help create a slightly firmer texture, while the parsley adds color and brightness without increasing the cost. Shape the mixture into 1 or 2 small patties. Then warm a teaspoon of oil in a skillet and cook them gently until both sides become lightly golden. There's no need for deep frying. You're simply creating a delicate crust while keeping the inside soft and tender. And if standing over the stove isn't appealing, there's an easier option. Press the mixture into a microwave-safe dish and heat it that way. It won't have the crispy outside, but the flavor and comfort remain exactly the same. Serve your patties alongside peas, applesauce, canned carrots, or even a spoonful of coleslaw if you happen to have some. Suddenly, a modest amount of fish becomes a complete dinner that feels much more generous than the ingredients would suggest. The fish provides protein and heart-healthy omega-3 fats. The potatoes offer steady energy and satisfying comfort. And together, they create a meal that's soft, filling, and wonderfully familiar. This recipe is especially useful because it stretches expensive ingredients wisely. Instead of relying on large portions of fish, it uses potatoes to create balance. That's the kind of practical kitchen wisdom that helped generations of families eat well without overspending. And perhaps that's why meals like this continue to endure. They're humble. But humble doesn't mean ordinary. It means resourceful. It means understanding that good food isn't measured by price tags, but by how it makes people feel. Because sometimes the most comforting meals are the ones that remind us where we came from. And speaking of comfort, the final recipe on this list might be the coziest one yet. Because with a handful of beans, a few tomatoes, and one simple topping, you'll create a warm and hearty supper that feels remarkably close to a homemade casserole. And the surprising ingredient on top is something many people already have sitting quietly in their refrigerator right now. After exploring all these meals, one thing becomes clear. Eating on a budget doesn't mean settling for joyless dinners or tiny portions. In fact, some of the most satisfying meals come from simple ingredients that have been feeding families for generations. And this final recipe may be the coziest of them all. Because with a few pantry staples and one comforting topping, you can create a meal that feels remarkably close to a homemade casserole. without spending hours in the kitchen or a fortune at the grocery store. 8. Rustic bean and biscuit tomato bake. There is something deeply comforting about bubbling tomato sauce and warm bread fresh from the oven. This recipe captures that feeling in a simple, single-serving meal that is easy to prepare and easy to enjoy. Start with half a cup of canned beans. Pinto beans, white beans, black-eyed peas, kidney beans, or even baked beans all work beautifully. Rinse them if you prefer a lighter flavor or want to reduce the sodium. Place the beans into a small oven-safe dish or microwave-safe bowl. Next, add about half a cup of diced tomatoes, tomato sauce, or even a few spoonfuls of tomato soup. Season the mixture with black pepper, onion powder, garlic powder, and a little paprika. Here's a small twist that gives this version a richer flavor. Add a pinch of dried oregano and a few drops of Worcestershire sauce. Those two ingredients bring a savory depth that makes the dish taste like it has been simmering for hours. If the tomatoes seem too sharp, a tiny pinch of brown sugar helps mellow the flavor. Warm everything together until the mixture becomes bubbly and fragrant. Now comes the ingredient that transforms this simple bowl into something special. Take half of a biscuit, a smallkin biscuit, or even a piece of leftover bread. Place it right on top of the tomato and bean mixture like a little cobbler topping. If you're using an oven or toaster oven, bake until the biscuit becomes warm and lightly golden. If you prefer the microwave, that's perfectly fine too. The biscuit will remain softer, which many people actually prefer. Once finished, allow it to sit for a minute before serving. That short rest gives the bread time to absorb some of the tomato sauce underneath, creating a texture that feels surprisingly similar to a comforting casserole. The beans provide fiber and plant-based protein. The tomatoes bring brightness and moisture. And the biscuit adds warmth and that unmistakable feeling of home. This meal is also wonderfully flexible. Corn, peas, or spinach can be added for extra vegetables. A little cheese on top melts beautifully. And if you have leftover sausage or shredded chicken, a small amount can easily turn this into an even heartier supper. But perhaps the most important lesson behind this recipe, and behind every meal we've shared today, is this. Simple food is not something to apologize for. For generations, families learned how to stretch ingredients, avoid waste, and create comfort from ordinary things. That wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. A spoonful of peanut butter turned noodles into supper. One egg transformed rice into something special. A slice of toast became chicken pot pie. And a handful of beans became a cozy casserole. These meals prove that eating well doesn't require fancy ingredients or expensive grocery bills. Sometimes all you need is a few humble ingredients, a little creativity, and the willingness to make something warm and nourishing for yourself. Because a comforting dinner doesn't have to impress anyone. It only has to do one simple thing. Help you end the day feeling cared for. And if today's ideas inspired you, tell us which recipe you would try first. Because sometimes the simplest meals become the ones we remember most. And who knows, your favorite comfort dinner might already be waiting in your pantry tonight.